have my side seams pinned and I'm going to sew them, but before I sew them, I need to talk about a couple things with you. So first, there are some dots on this seam line. If you don't have those dots there, then you need to go find your pattern piece for either the pocket or piece 1 or piece 2, whichever one it is, and you need to transfer those dots over because they're really important here. This is why the dots are important. I'm going to backstitch here. I will sew to the first dot and backstitch and end my first seam here. Then I'm going to leave a hole in the middle of the dots. That's where my hand goes into my pocket. If I sew that closed, I don't have a pocket anymore. I did all of that pocket work for nothing. So I need to leave this opening here open. And then I'm going to start at this next dot, backstitch and sew to the end. I will do all of that sewing at 5/8 inch seam allowance away from this cut or raw edge here. So that's why I sewed at 3/8 inch when I sewed my pocket on, so that when I sew at 5/8 inch, that seam line is kind of hidden, and it's hidden in the side seam, so you won't see it. And it helps the pocket kind of hide away without coming like out when you wear your pants. So it's really important that when you sew this, all your seam allowances are towards the pocket. You're sewing at 5/8 inch, you stop at the first dot, leave this opening, and start at the second dot. I'm going to go ahead and sew that, so watch as I do this, and then I will do the same thing on the other side, but it won't be in the video. So you'll do it. You'll just copy the same thing on the other side. So I'm going to double check that all my seam allowance on the other side of the pocket is towards the pocket. It's going to be tricky here because I won't actually be able to see my stitch plate as I sew. So I'm going to look right now before I line everything up. I'm going to see this is my 5/8 and this is where the seam allowance I want to line up with my 5/8, and then I'm just going to slide it back, lining it up with that line still, and I will lower my presser foot. I'm going to backstitch, and I'm just going to keep my eye. I want this to stay about the same here that whole time I sew. So I'm going to backstitch and I'll sew to this first dot. Okay. Now I'm at my dot. I'm going to go ahead and backstitch. And then I'm done with this seam, so I'll go ahead and just trim my threads before moving on to the next seam. So I'll trim those. Then I'm going to pull my threads back because I don't want them to get tangled up. And I just need to remember about where the 5/8 is. So I'm going to have to just guess, like I'm going to have to do my best because there's not going to be anything that I can line up with, but I can see there's about 1/4 of an inch here, a little bit more than 1/4 of an inch. So I want that space to be the same down here. So I'll try and line it up similarly. I don't see my 5/8 inch line like I normally do, but I need to do my best to line it up. I'm gonna start at this dot, so I don't know if you could see that, but the dot's right here. And I'm just gonna line right up on top of that dot. I could even use my needle to figure out right where that dot is. I'm going to backstitch. And then I will continue sewing down the whole leg of my pants. Sometimes the seam allowance here, it kind of wants to, like your presser foot, like mine just did, it wants to slide off the edge of it. So you just want to make sure that you are in control and you're not letting the seam allowance take over. And then as I get to the side seam, I just want to make sure that I'm close to 5/8. I actually am right on the 5/8. I don't know if you can see that. So that was kind of lucky. My 5/8 is right there. There's my side seams. But if you're off a little bit, then you're just going to gradually get back to where you're right on the 5/8 again. And I'll just continue sewing down the rest of the leg. And also down here in backstitch, trim my threads. And I have sewn my whole side seam now. Up at the top here, I'll trim these threads as well. But I should have a hole in between my notches, or my dots I mean, where I haven't sewn. So you can see my pins are still there because I didn't ever sew there. And I can take those pins out now and I should be able to put my hand through that hole. So if I open it up, my hand can go through that into the pocket. My pocket's not sewn closed on the other side, so it's just kind of goes through to a hole. But I want that there, that hole between the two dots. Now go ahead and do the same thing on the other side of your pajama or your joggers.